In anticipation of the winter camping season, I thought it would be good for me to review the Guide Gear camp stove. This is the very first camp stove that I used in my hot tent. I tested the stove out over 3 or 4 days in my backyard, as well as several winter camping trips last winter. I am not sponsored by Guide Gear or Sportsman Guide. These are just my overall impressions of this stove, and hopefully it'll help you make a purchasing decision. I purchased this stove because it was inexpensive. At $108 plus tax and shipping, it was a good starter camp stove. I had several other options to choose from. I was thinking about getting like a titanium model, but I decided to start with this Guide Gear stove because it was a lot cheaper, and I wanted to make sure that I even enjoyed winter camping before I spent $400 or $500 on a titanium model. I purchased it on sportsmanguide.com, and I will include a link down in the description below. Again, I am not sponsored by these guys, and that is not an affiliate link. It'll just bring you straight to the stove if this is something that you would like to look at. So, let's start with the weight and the dimensions of this camp stove. This is a 2mm thick galvanized steel firebox with a high temp finish. It has a cast iron door with these little adjustable vents in it. There are the 5 interlocking stove pipes that are also made of galvanized steel. It has this cool touch coil handle. It has an adjustable damper, and as far as the measurements go for the dimensions, the door opening is 10 inches by 8 inches high, and the actual firebox itself is 11 inches wide by 17 inches deep by 8 inches high, with an overall dimension of 12.5 inches wide, 19 inches deep, and 7.7 inches high. Finally, the weight for everything you see here is 43 pounds. Next is assembly. It was easy to assemble the legs to the body of the stove, as well as to add the stove pipes. The coiled handle was a bit annoying to assemble. And also, upon assembling the door handle, I noticed the latch was very temperamental, and I immediately realized that that was going to be a problem, and that was confirmed later on. Curing the stove was super easy. I cured it over 2 days on my back porch in snowy conditions. It did not turn gray as the instructions indicated, but the smell of the coating dissipated in about 3 hours. As far as setting it up in the hot tent, that was very, very easy to set up. Hot tents don't normally have floors, so you'd be setting this up directly on the ground. And that being said, I recommend clearing the area of any leaves or debris, or if there's snow, clear it of the snow and ice. For our camping trip, we ended up bringing a piece of 1/2-inch plywood to place the stove on, and we covered that with a fireproof mat to prevent fires. That helped the stove stay level and not sink into the ground. As it got hot and melted the ground, it could start sinking. As far as using the stove inside of the tent, it is very, very easy to use. Fire starts quickly. I had an issue with sparks burning a couple of tiny holes in my tent the second day. And while camping, it snowed continuously. So we had an issue with some soot running down the stovepipe later on in the campout. Also, I discovered that the door design is absolutely terrible and it won't latch fully. And because of that, it was letting some smoke into the tent. As far as cooking on the stove inside of the tent, the surface is large enough to fit a 15-inch diameter cast iron pan. I cooked several meals on the stove, including chicken fajitas, chorizo and beans, and BLTs. I will link those videos in the description. And I have to say, while it did take some time and you can only use really one pot at a time on this camp stove, it did do the job. The pros of this Guide Gear camp stove are that it's inexpensive, it's very easy to assemble, and it burns really hot. It's easy to start a fire, and cooking on it is a breeze. As far as the cons of this Guide Gear camp stove, it is heavy, it rusts quickly. After about 5 hours of a continuous fire, it gets smoky when you open the door to feed the fire. The door design is complete garbage. I'll talk to you a little bit more about that in a second. And finally, the top of the stove warped within 3 uses, although this could have been because of the extreme variations in temperature, and as I read up on it a little bit more, that seems to be kind of normal. The reason I hate the door handle is because it will not fully lock. I don't know if this is due to maybe a faulty door handle that I got, but it just seems that it's not designed very well. I guess that's to be expected when you're paying $100 for a camp stove. It's not going to be, you know, the best of the best. But let me show you what I'm talking about as far as the door not locking. Here is the door design itself. And in theory, this area right here will latch right into here, right? But when you go to do so, you have to push this in. When there's no fire going, that seems pretty easy. But when there is a fire raging in here, getting a good grip on the stove itself, you can't touch it here. You can't push in right here because this part's going to be hot. The only part that's not is the coiled handle. And this part doesn't really cooperate very well. So I always had this little tiny gap right here, and this would let some smoke out. Sometimes I'd have to lay a log like right here to keep the door shut. And that's just not good design. So finally, I'd like to give you my overall impressions of this Guide Gear camp stove. I knew going into this purchase that it wasn't going to meet all of my expectations. It was simply a cheap and easy option so I could start experimenting with hot tent camping. I think it's a good starter stove. This is definitely not something you could take backpacking as it is far too heavy. You can pretty much only use this stove at a developed campsite or somewhere where you're going to be able to like take a wagon and bring it in with you. I don't like how fast it rusted and warped, but a lot of that could have been my fault because I had this outside in a lot of different conditions. It got wet, it got dry, it got hot, it got cold. So I'm not going to fault the stove for that. That's probably user error. So the thing that really killed this camp stove for me was this door latch. And I know that sounds a little bit nitpicky, but it's actually a really big deal. You need to have easy accessibility to feed the fire and make adjustments. So if you're having to fight with the stove every single time you need to open the latch, that's a huge flaw. Overall, I would give this camp stove a 5 out of 10. It's definitely not the worst, but it is nowhere near the best. My next camp stove is going to be a lightweight titanium model that folds up. I am researching it as we speak, and I'm going to be buying that for my winter camping adventures this season. This bad boy is going to be retired. But if you are just getting into hot tent camping and you want to experiment with something cheap, I would say you could go with this option as long as you're not going to be going way back into the woods because it is way too heavy to carry. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed to my channel yet, be sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell next to it so you'll be notified whenever I release a new video. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Hey guys, if you are into camping, RVs, or anything to do with the outdoors, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We release new videos every week. And if you found value from this video, please give it a thumbs up or leave a comment below. That way the YouTube algorithm will recognize that people enjoy this video and show it to other people that are looking for the same information as you. All right, we'll see you next time. Peace.